Good afternoon, and thank you all for joining us for the National Center for Rural Road Safety's November webinar. My name is Jamie Sullivan, the Director of the Rural Safety Center. We're going to go ahead and start the recording for this meeting, and we're going to delve right into Part 5, Rural Safe System Approach for Safe Roads. I'm going to first start by talking through some of our poll questions and who is joining us today. It looks like we have about 8% joining us from the Northeast, 12% from the Southeast, 42% from the Midwest, 37% from the West, and about 2% from other. From our organization types, we have 2% from federal DOT, 46% from state DOT, 17% from local DOT, 2% from tribal government, 10% from other federal, state, or local government agency, 2% from first response agency, 4% from educational institution, and 17% from private consultants. It looks like most of you are joining us by computer only today. If for some reason you do have any audio issues, we would suggest that you call into the phone number to help out with those audio issues. Our phone number can be found in the top left-hand corner of the screen today. And it does look like we have several of you that are joining us back in rooms that have several people. If you have not each registered individually and you're interested in receiving the certificates of completion or CEUs for today's webinar, we would ask you to please email us at info@ruralsafetycenter.org and provide us with the names and email addresses for those of you who did not register individually for today's webinar, and we'll make sure to get the survey out to you. That will be how you request that information. I'm going to move us over to our presentation and go through just a few more logistics for you all today. Our webinar, as always, is going to be an hour and a half long. It is being recorded so that it can be archived on our website. For quality of that recording, we have muted all phone lines during the presentation. If you are listening by phone, we would ask that you please mute your computer speakers so that you don't hear any feedback. Today we will have some graphics and a video that will be played. If you'd like to see those larger in order to maximize the presentation on your screen and get rid of some of the extraneous information along the outside and bottom, you can press the square that is shown in the top right now of the PowerPoint. It's going to be right above it to go full screen. If you click on that button again, it will drop you back into the normal screen with all of the information along the outside. At the end of each section today, of which there will be 3, we will stop and have question and answer for our speakers, as well as do some poll questions for you, the audience. You can feel free to put those questions into the chat pod, which is on the left-hand side, at any time. And when we do stop for question and answer, I will read those out to our presenters for you. There's also a handout pod at the bottom of the screen in the left-hand corner. You may download that PDF version of today's webinar slides. In it, you'll also find the link for the survey, which I'll show you in 1 second as well as all of the resources that we'll provide to you at the end of today's presentation. If you wouldn't mind, we would appreciate you please complete the follow-up surveys, as they're vital for us picking new webinar topics that will be coming up. In addition, the survey that will be sent directly following today's webinar, you can also find the survey link right now on the screen. And again, it is available in that PDF as well in case it does get stuck in your junk mail, which sometimes it does. That survey closes 2 weeks after the webinar, so you can expect certificates and CEU forms within 4 to 6 weeks after we've manually created them. The CEU forms themselves are returned to continuinged@montana.edu and not to the Rural Safety Center. That is handled through a different part of Montana State University. You can also request a verification of completion form from them, which will tell you CEUs that you've received from all of the different trainings or summits that you've requested them from for the Rural Safety Center. For today's presenters, we have 4 presenters that will be talking today about safe roads. Our first will be Dick Albin. He joined FHWA as a safety engineer with the FHWA Resource Center's Safety and Design team in June of 2008. Prior to joining FHWA, Dick worked for 15 years with the Washington State Department of Transportation and for 6 years with the New York State Department of Transportation. He graduated from the University of Wyoming with a BS in Civil Engineering and is a licensed professional engineer in Washington State. Dick chaired the TRB Roadside Safety Design Committee from 2009 to 2015 and is also a member of several NCHRP panels that oversee research on roadside safety issues. Dick is one of the leads for the Everyday Counts EDC initiative of focus on reducing rural roadway departures, of which he's going to talk to us about today. Next, we have Rod Turochy, who is the director of the Alabama Transportation Assistance Program and a professor in the Department of Civil and Environmental Engineering. He has been at Auburn since 2002 and has led the ATAP Center since October of 2018. His interests are in road design and traffic engineering, including pedestrian safety and facilities. Next, we'll have Kathy Gregory speak to us. She is the executive director for the 50 Fund, a nonprofit focusing on helping communities become safer, cleaner, and more beautiful. She is an advocate for increased transportation funding and equitable distribution of public resources. And finally, we'll have Duncan Smith speak with us. He is the State Traffic Safety Engineer at the South Carolina Department of Transportation. He proudly served in the U.S. Coast Guard prior to obtaining his Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from the University of South Carolina. He is a registered professional engineer in South Carolina and Kentucky. He began working at South Carolina DOT in 2011 in the Aiken County Maintenance, followed by a stint in Roadway Design Support Unit of the Pre-Construction Division, and he served as the Roadway Design Support Engineer. Duncan joined the Traffic Division as the State Traffic Safety Engineer in May of 2019. Our goal for today's webinar is that once you've completed the webinar, we hope you'll have an understanding of the safe road element in the safe system approach through the lens of actions that agencies can take. To achieve this webinar goal, we're going to have 6 learning outcomes. The first is to list how the 4 pillars of forward relate to the safe system approach, to name forward countermeasures that can be applied to create safer roads, to describe the STEP UC model being used to engage historically underserved communities and empower them to advocate for their pedestrian facility needs, to list pedestrian facility improvements that will lead to safer walking environments, to explain the steps South Carolina DOT took to create their Rural Road Safety Program, and to list the systemic engineering solutions used by South Carolina DOT's Rural Road Safety Program. First, real quick before we get started, I do just want to remind everyone about our safe system approach. Again, this is the 5th of a 6-series webinar. Our goal right now is 0. So we want to get to 0 fatalities and serious injuries, and how we get there is through using the safe system approach. That is our framework, and our foundation really needs to be traffic safety culture. A good example that someone explained to me recently is if we consider trying to get to an island using a sailboat, that island or destination is our goal of 0 fatalities and serious injuries. And our sailboat is the safe system approach. It's how we're going to get to that island. But we can't get our sailboat to go unless we have wind. And that is our foundation of traffic safety culture. And so it's very important that in order to get to that goal of 0, we are using positive safety culture, and that we're all in this together and using safety as making safety our priority, and also knowing that we use a collaborative approach and use the safe system approach itself. As a reminder of what the safe system approach is, it's a holistic approach that aims to eliminate fatal and serious injuries for all road users, and has 6 principles, which you can see on the outside of the graphic right now. Those are: redundancy is crucial, death, serious injury is unacceptable, humans make mistakes, humans are vulnerable, responsibility is shared, and safety is proactive. We also have the 5 elements, which you can see on the inside of the wheel: safe road users, safe vehicles, safe speeds, safe roads, and post-crash care. And today we're focusing on that safe road piece. Much of our audience is typically on the engineering and planning side, so the safe roads is something that we talk about a lot. Our other 5 webinars have been focused on the other 4 elements, as well as the first one being an introduction to the safe system approach and to safety culture itself. And today I'm excited to have you hear more about how we can use the forward approach, the step you see approach, and then also a great case study from South Carolina on how they've put safe system approach into place in their rural areas. And so at this point, I'm going to turn our webinar over to Dick Albin to begin with the forward approach. Dick?
All right, thank you. And yeah, so as Jamie said, I'm one of the leads for an EDC effort that we call Forward, which is focused on reducing rural roadway departures. And if you've been on webinars with me before, you probably heard me talk a lot about it. But today I'm also going to be talking about the safe system and how those are interconnected. So I'm going to try to provide some of the wind for Jamie's sailboat. So just a little bit of background. As most of you are aware, every year we have over 35,000 people that are killed on our roads. That number is actually on the low side now because numbers have gone up a little bit in the last couple of years. But you know, that is a sobering statistic of that many people dying on our roads. If we break it down, though, you know, we see that it's about a 50-50 split between urban and rural, which, you know, for the rural part of it, that's a little bit overrepresented because less than 20% of people live in rural areas, but that's where 51% of the fatalities are occurring. But the biggest chunk of those rural fatalities come from roadway departures. Rural roadway departures make up about 1/3 of all fatalities. Right? That's about almost 12,000 people every year, and that's why we want to focus on those. You know, our definition of a roadway departure is a crash in which a vehicle crosses an edge line, a center line, or otherwise leaves a traveled way. And if you prefer the term lane departure, that's fine. I think we're talking about the same things. But it does include the crashes where somebody runs off the road and rolls over or hits a fixed object, but also can include crashes where a vehicle crosses a center line and hits another vehicle coming in the opposite direction. So that's what we're talking about with roadway departures. And when you break the 12,000 people every year, that ends up being 30 people every day that die as a result of a rural roadway departure. And we want to try to save the people behind those numbers. So our mission with Forward is to reduce the potential for serious injury and fatal roadway departure crashes on all public roads by increasing the systemic deployment of proven countermeasures. And within that mission statement, we have really 4 main, what we call pillars. The 4 pillars of Forward. They're all public roads, safety action plans, systemic approach, and proven countermeasures. And I'm going to be touching on each of those a little bit more as we go. But we also have, as Jamie brought up, the safe system approach. And I know some people might be thinking, you know, are these comparable? Are they connected to each other? And hopefully after today's session, you'll say, yes, they are. But as Jamie mentioned, that there's 5 elements here in the middle. I'm going to try to use a cursor here. 5 elements here, and we're focusing in on the safe roads element today. But we also have the 6 principles that are around the circle, and those are highlighted over here a little bit bigger. So the death and serious injuries are unacceptable. Responsibility is shared. Humans make mistakes, and safety is proactive. Humans are vulnerable, and then redundancy is critical. And so I'm going to be touching on each of those and talking about how they relate to the pillars of Forward. So first off, we have our pillar that's all public roads. And what we're talking about there is when we look at where these fatal crashes occur, we don't have the best data on jurisdiction and who owns roads in our FARS database. I think they've added a category, but we don't think it's being filled in quite correctly yet. But one of the things we looked at was what are the functional classification of the roads. And the roads that are typically maintained by a state include a state agency, include interstates, principal arterials, minor arterials, whereas roads that are typically maintained by a local agency might be local roads or minor collectors, major collectors. And so when you look at it that way, about 45% of the rural roadway departure fatalities are happening on those roads that might typically be maintained by a local agency. I know there are some states that where the state agency maintains most of the roads in the state, but it might still be a secondary type system that maybe doesn't get the same attention that other roads get. So to be able to get to zero, we need to address these other roads. They might be county roads, they might be tribal roads, township roads, but we're not going to get to zero if we don't address those roads as well. So our all public roads pillar, that gets into and is connected to our principle that death and serious injury is unacceptable. You know, we wouldn't accept it on a local road any more than we would accept it on a state road. And then responsibility is shared. There's a responsibility of all of the agencies that maintain the roads to work together to try to make sure that resources are spent in a way that can help reduce the overall number of people that are being killed. So that's our first pillar in connection with the safe system approach. Now, a question that I usually ask everyone, and it's better when it's live and people can raise their hands, but you know, why do drivers leave the road? I think if everyone here thinks back to a time, there's probably been some event where you've been in a vehicle that has left the road for some reason or another. And so why is that? You know, you think about why did you run off the road? Usually it breaks down into one of four categories. It could be something with the roadway. Maybe it's a sharp curve, or maybe the pavement is slick, or something along those lines that resulted in a driver losing control and leaving the road. It could be something in the vehicle failed. You could have a tire blowout, or a couple of years ago there was an issue with ignition switches that were shutting off while you were driving. So something in the vehicle that fails that causes the vehicle to leave the road. It might be that the driver is trying to avoid a different collision. If you're driving down the road and another vehicle crosses the center line and is heading straight to you, a lot of times you might instinctively decide to leave the roadway to avoid that crash. Another example is animal crashes. If a deer jumps out in front of you, instinct kicks in and you might try to avoid the deer and take your chances on the roadside. But the vast majority of crashes have some type of driver error element, where something that the driver was doing, whether it be driving too fast or too fast for conditions, or maybe impaired, or things along those lines, where there was some type of driver action that resulted in the crash occurring. Now, when we get into then looking at where do we invest to improve safety on our roads, and we look at, you know, this is just a road system, and you're going to see different crashes. You see the green dots there for crashes that happened in 2014. When we look at where they occur year after year, if we're only looking at crashes, I'm going to add another year. You can see the red dots are there now. They're in different locations for the most part, different roads altogether. 2016, we added in some purple dots, and you can see those are on different locations as well. 2017, and then 2018. And I think when you look at a map like this, you see that these crashes really aren't concentrated in the same place year after year. So it's not easy to just go out and say, I'm going to fix this location, I've solved my problem, because now we have a crash that happened somewhere else. And that's because drivers make mistakes. Drivers make mistakes, and that can happen anywhere on the system. So it doesn't necessarily happen at the same place every time. So that is why it's important that we not only just look at where crashes have happened in the past, but also look at where they might happen in the future. But from that, we get that fatal crash locations tend to be fairly random. Again, they're based on human error for the most part. But the crash types are fairly predictable. You see the same types of crashes year after year when you look at the crashes. You have a big chunk of them are roadway departures, and of those, hitting things like trees or rolling over or things along those lines are fairly predictable. And I'm going to skip that one and come back to it because it's in the wrong order. So, but that leads us to what we call our systemic approach, and that's one of our pillars of forward, the systemic approach. And the systemic approach is defined in code as the systemic safety improvement means a proven safety countermeasure that is widely implemented based on high-risk roadway features that are correlated with particular severe crash types. So rather than just looking at where crashes happened in the past, what we're looking for is what are the roadway features associated with those crashes? And if we can identify those as risk factors, then we go after where those risk factors occur on the system, and we attack those locations. And it might mean that you're making an improvement at a location that hasn't had a crash in the last couple of years, but it has risk factors and it might have one next year. So that's the systemic approach. That's one of our pillars. And now I'm going to back up. We did produce a video that kind of goes over the three approaches to safety: the site-specific or hotspot approach, the systematic approach, which is different from the systemic approach. And we tried to explain the distinctions between those different approaches. So there is a link here. I don't know if Jamie is going to be putting the link in the chat pod as well, but it's also on our website. So now the systemic approach, the connection with the safe system approach, we know that humans make mistakes. And we want to try to be proactive in addressing safety. And that's what the systemic approach really is a proactive approach. Rather than waiting for a crash to occur, we try to get there before the crash occurs. Now, we have countermeasures that we know work. With roadway departure, our first objective is to keep the vehicle on the road. If we can keep all of the vehicles on the road, we won't have roadway departures anymore. Or in their lane, on the road and in their lane. And we have countermeasures that are very good at doing that. We have curve signing to let drivers know that a curve's coming up, and it also gives them a sense of how sharp they are by how chevrons are placed around them. We have pavement markings that give them an idea of where the edge of the lanes are. We have friction treatments that are very effective in curves and increasing the friction that tends to wear down in curves. And then we have rumble strips that alert the driver that they're about to leave the road. And so any of you that when I asked if you've ever run off the road, if you've ever run across and gotten onto a rumble strip on the shoulder, that is a roadway departure. So you were involved in a roadway departure crash at some point. But we know even if we do all of these countermeasures, there are still going to be instances where vehicles depart the lane and depart the roadway. So then we try to reduce the potential for a crash to occur when that happens. And we do that with providing shoulders where they can start recovering, the safety edge so you don't have an edge drop off at the edge of the lane or the edge of the shoulder. Providing a buffer at the center line to reduce those head-on crashes gives a little bit more room there. And then providing clear zones that have traversable slopes to give the driver a chance to recover without impacting something. But we know that isn't always possible. It might be impractical to flatten out all of the slopes and remove all of the objects that happen on the roadway. So then our last objective is to try to minimize the severity of a crash that does occur. And we do that with things like breakaway devices for sign supports or luminaires. We also use barriers. We put in a barrier to lessen the severity. We know that there's still going to be crashes that occur, but we want to reduce a fatal or serious injury down to a property damage crash. We have some fairly new promotional items that we've developed over on the right-hand side is just a kind of a screenshot of a poster that's available on our website that was developed, and you can, print it out. You can, we have some that we printed out and that you can get from our report center. But we also have produced a pocket guide as well. This is a 4 by 8 inch pocket guide, so it could theoretically fit in your pocket. It has a table here that gives the different countermeasures, about a dozen different countermeasures, grouped by whether they're keeping you in the lane or reducing the potential for a crash or minimizing severity, and gives you some idea of what types of crashes that those are really the primary countermeasure for. And then within the guide, it also, for each of the different countermeasures, we give some information, a description, the crash reduction factors that are used for that can be used for that countermeasure, where to use them, things along those lines. We are working at getting some of these printed, and there was a issue with supply of paper for these, the paper we were using, but we're hoping that those will be available soon. But they are posted on our website if you want to go out and check them out and download them. And so, with our roadway departure countermeasures as one of our pillars of forward, we know that humans make mistakes. We also know that they're vulnerable. So running into a fixed object or something like that is very, puts a lot of force on the occupants of the vehicle. So we want to minimize the severity of those crashes or eliminate them by removing fixed objects altogether. And then redundancy is critical. It may not be that we just do one of them. We might not just have rumble strips, but we might also want to provide a clear zone. And in some cases, providing barriers for objects that we can't remove. So there is redundancy there as well. Now, our last of our pillars is our safety action plans pillar. Every state has a strategic highway safety plan. And the main goal here is to get from the strategies in your strategic highway safety plan, getting down to how are you going to use the funding that's available, whether it be federal funding or state funding or local funding. Where are you going to prioritize those locations? And a tool that is very effective in helping agencies identify the priorities is developing a safety action plan. It could be a statewide plan, a regional plan, a local road safety plan, and it could be a plan that's focused on a specific crash type, like roadway departure or intersections or pedestrians. So having a safety action plan really helps prioritize and helps agencies identify where funding is best spent. From a local agency standpoint, it helps them provide justification for grants and things along those lines. We do have an infographic on the local road safety plans, that kind of goes through the process of identifying stakeholders, using your safety data, using proven countermeasures, and then implementing those solutions at work to get them out on the ground. So many states and local agencies have developed local road safety plans, as well as tribes. There's quite a few tribes that have developed a tribal safety plan to help them prioritize their needs. Just recently, we completed another video that is a case study on California. So that is available on our website now as well. And it kind of goes over some of what California has done to implement local road safety plans across the state. So our safety action plan pillar that relates to responsibility is shared. It's not just a state network type thing, but it might be a state helping the local agencies to develop their plans or implement the solutions in the plans. And again, safety is proactive. Doing the plans in advance so that you can identify those priorities in advance. Another new video that we have, if you like this presentation so far, you can hear it in a slightly different way in this video that I'm showing right now, but this is just a screenshot from that video, but it's driving forward to a safe system, and it kind of goes over this relationship that I've laid out here. So that is available on our website now as well. keeping Jamie busy with putting in links. So in our website, we do have a series of pages for our forward website. We have a main page, and then we have a page for each of the individual pillars. But we also have our resources page, and that's really where we're keeping a lot of these products that I've mentioned. We have the, let me back up. We have, up front here, we have some of the promotional material. So our pocket guide is here, our poster. We have the trading cards that many of you may have seen in the past. We have things like the crash tree diagram tool is out there, and then we got the infographics. We also have our videos. And here is where you'd see the Driving Forward to a Safe System video that I mentioned, as well as the California case study video. But there's others as well. We also have a series of webinars that are all out there and linked, so that if you want to go out and view some of those, as well as other news stories and articles and things along those lines. So I encourage you to go out and take a look at this page to see if there's any of the resources there that might be useful to you. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, 30 people are going to die today as a result of a rural roadway departure. We want to try to save the people behind those numbers. And as Jamie mentioned, zero is our goal, and the safe system is how we get there. And forward and the safe system are really very well connected. Forward is really the safe system approach for rural roadway departures. So with that, I don't know if there's any questions we want to cover now, or how I'm doing on time, but I'll hand it over to Jamie.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So at this time, we will take any questions you may have for Dick. You can put those in the chat pod on the left-hand side. I am going to move us over to the poll question, and I did also want to let you know I put all 3 video links into the chat pod, as well as the link to the forward resources. And again, all of those are available in the PDF handout in the bottom left-hand of your screen as well. So we do have 3 poll questions to ask our audience. Our first one is, which of the following demonstrates how the 4 pillars relate to the 6 safe system approach principles? For proven countermeasures, humans make mistakes, humans are vulnerable, and redundancy is crucial. For the systemic approach, humans make mistakes and safety is proactive. For safety action plans, responsibility is shared and safety is proactive. For all public roads, death, serious injury is unacceptable and responsibility is shared. All of the above, none of the above. Our second question for you is an open-ended question. We're hoping you can please list a few of the forward countermeasures that can be applied to create safer roads. And then for those of you who have joined us for webinars before, you know that we typically ask a challenge question for each of our sections. So you'll hear this 3 times today. But from this particular section of the webinar, what is one action item you'd consider implementing in your jurisdiction? We encourage you to write it down at your desk, but if you'd also like to share it here in the poll pod, we'd love to see some of your answers as well. So we'll give everyone just a few seconds. And again, if you have any questions for Dick, you can put those over on the left-hand side in the chat pod. All right, so Dick, it looks like the first question is done, so I'm going to end that one and broadcast the results for you. And then I'll broadcast the results for the other ones too, if you'd like to address all of them.
Okay, yeah. So on the first one, we talked about the relationship with the 4 pillars, and the A, B, C, and D are all correct, so that would be all of the above. So it looks like just about everyone got that one. So very good. Yeah, and as far as the countermeasures, we got rumble strips, safety edge. So rumble strip shows up a couple different times there. Curve signing, widening shoulders, so very good. And again, those are all things that we know work. We've got the studies and the crash modification factors, crash reduction factors that go along with those. And the challenges that I see there from the section there, so safety action plans, I saw that one. Safety edge and clear zones, improving sight distance, looks like that was in there as well. Let's see, improved markings, more consistent management of decision, sight distance for drivers. Okay, very good. Good. Well, hopefully you took something away from this, and I look forward to any questions that you might have.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dick. And again, if you do have any questions, you can put them in the chat pod at any time, and we'll come back at the next break, and we can ask those of our speakers as well. At this point, I am going to turn our time over to Kathy and Rod to discuss the STEP UC program. Kathy?
Yes. Can you hear me okay?
Yep. Perfect.
Great. Okay. So I just want to start out by saying that the Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian in Underserved Communities, or STEP UP, it's a collaboration of the Federal Highway Administration, the Alabama Department of Transportation, the Alabama Transportation Assistance Program at Auburn University, and the 50 Fund. And so for my part, I want to focus on the 50 Fund. And so we're a nonprofit, and our mission includes helping communities become safe, clean, and beautiful. There's some research that says that if communities feel that way about themselves, they're generally happier. And we focus on communities that are under-resourced, might call those underserved, under-engaged, under-funded. All those are true, however you refer to them. And through that work, we quickly moved to a transportation safety initiative, and we call that initiative Stay in Your Lane. And it began with a seatbelt campaign, which was aimed toward young minority males and developed by young minority males because we were finding they were overrepresented in our unbelted crash data. And then we moved to a distracted driving campaign with State Farm. Here in Alabama, young people were running off the road and older people are having head-on crashes. And then based on the data, we found that once again our community was overrepresented in the data, and this time it was pedestrian crashes. And so we began our pedestrian safety campaign. And so we've been doing this for, I guess, about 10 years. And one of the things that we learned, or actually 3 of the things we learned, is that in order to make real change in communities, you really need 3 things. You need that technical expertise, and in this case, it would be our transportation engineers and planners and people with pedestrian expertise. And the next thing that you need is engagement with the community. And this means people that are really good at forming relationships with the community and learning with them, but still able to keep the community in the center of that conversation. And then the last thing you need is record keeping. And we believe you need creative record keeping because there's a diverse audience that we speak to when we're trying to promote transportation initiatives. And having a paper report aimed at engineers is not really capturing our market. So we are convinced that creative record keeping is necessary for moving communities. So what do we bring? Well, we said that we were going to get really good at providing 2 of these things, and that way we would be so fluid and so good at it that the technical experts would want to join us. We're an all-volunteer organization, so we want to make that time as easy as possible. And so the things that we bring to the process are, well, we bring a standardized process for engaging the community. In this case, the project we're going to be talking about today that Rod will talk about a little later is in Troy, Alabama. And so in order to engage that community, we use a standardized process. And it sounds really stupidly simple. I call it just making friends, but that is what we do. We go into the communities and we look at educators, transit providers, anyone interested in active communities, people who do youth programming, and we reach out to them and say, are you interested in improving your pedestrian facilities? And for those that respond, we form a team. And the Step Up team, and in this case, the Troy team, start to meet and educate each other. The community representatives learn about pedestrian facilities and, more powerfully, how to fund them. And the Step Up team learns about the pedestrian needs in the community, and together we identify the specific communities that we'll be walking. And a lot of times we learn things as professionals that we may not have known before. In Troy, we really got a lesson on how transit has to flawlessly integrate with pedestrian facilities in order to be able to really move people in the communities that we focus on. And then another thing that we bring is we bring a standardized document for how to create condition assessments and how to make recommendations for them. And in this case, it's going to be the walk-around guide. So this is a standard tool that we use to walk around, and it has some educational components in it, but mainly it's an assessment tool for looking at their facilities. Then the next thing that we bring is we bring this creative process for record keeping. As I told you before, I believe that our reports should be like visually appealing and easy for stakeholders to promote our work. So we make sure that when we do interim reports or any reports, we include pictures, we make sure that they are engaging and that it's something that people would want to read from all our audiences. And then the next thing that we do is when we produce these final reports of recommendations from our walk around, because finally we do walk around with the communities, we make sure that we use a graphic artist that's also an engineer. And she visually represents every improvement that we recommend from our walk around. Our goal is that our community organizers fully understand the changes that are being sought. In fact, the community organizers present the reports to their municipal bodies, their city or town councils, or whatever approval is needed for the funding. And yet, that's really the goal for us. Yesterday, a community that we had worked with previously called me, and she's the head of their Girls and Boys Club, and she really needed some ADA facilities in front of where they have their meetings. And they came in yesterday, or came in a few days ago, and started putting new sidewalks down, but did not include those facilities. And she pulled out her copy of the recommendations guide and called the assistant city engineer, and the contractor was back the next day making that right. That, to me, is a fully engaged community. She knew who to call, and she didn't have to call anyone else to do it. She had a direct link to that. And I know not all road owning agencies are ready to handle that kind of involvement, but the places that we work really are. And then I guess the last thing that we provide is that whenever we go out, we always take a production crew. And that production crew, we produce short, fun videos that helps the community set the tone for what they've done. They often pick the music, and we try to aim for that 1.5 minutes so that they can show it over and over again. And I think we have an example of one of those now that we shot in Troy, and this would be something that we put online.
Kathy, I'll just ask that you mute while the video is playing, and we'll get started here in just a second.
So the community helps us with the video. We edit it together. And I think it provides an opportunity for us to present the conditions without having to degrade anybody over it. And we have been provided access to major music catalogs for being able to do it. And so it's one of the things that I think is most important for it, is to be able to get that video out there. So as you can see, we have learned that we can provide the engagement with the community and we can provide the record keeping, but without the technical expertise, I like to say we are just 411, and when we add that technical expertise, we can become 911. And for our particular expertise, we always reach out to a familiar partner, and that's Turochy and the Alabama Transportation Assistance Program. And they have been with us through multiple communities, and they've just been awarded a $1.3 million RAISE grant to continue to plan for 12 more communities. And they were awarded that with no match. So I'm really proud to be associated with them and the work that Rod's doing over there. So I'm going to turn it over to him now.
All right, I hope y'all can hear me, and Kathy, thank you very much for bringing us this far through the story of what we've been doing in the STEP for Underserved Communities initiative. So just to talk a little bit more about ATAP, or the Alabama ATAP Center's role with this effort. The mission of, I think, really any LTAP center is primarily to provide training and technical assistance on transportation issues for local governments and others, but particularly for municipalities and counties. And a focus on safety, I've always thought is important, and in my 3 years of involvement in this role with the LTAP Center, I've really tried to raise the profile of the center on safety issues, particularly with pedestrians and with roadway departures, because those are two areas where here in Alabama I think we can do better. As you all probably know, the increase in pedestrian fatalities over the last decade or so has been pretty disproportionate to the overall increase in traffic fatalities, as you can see by the numbers here. So that definitely highlights that improving pedestrian safety, and part of what needs to be done is providing adequate infrastructure to do that, is a pretty high priority in the road safety community that all of us are part of. So as part of our efforts to increase our focus on safety and community engagement, we've worked together with the 50 Fund, since part of their mission is to improve the safety in communities, particularly with their history of working on various transportation safety culture initiatives. To develop this STEP for underserved communities model that we'll see here in a couple of minutes is intended for others to be able to use as well. But we'll go ahead and finish the rest of the story about what we've been doing over the last several months in Troy, Alabama. Another item that Kathy mentioned is connections to transit. Sidewalks, of course, are typically the connection point to transit. And in these types of communities, for many people, access to a motor vehicle is not reliable or even not existent. We've got a lot of relatively pedestrian and transit captive residents in these areas. So their need to connect the transit for their trips, whether they're for work trips or running errands trips or medical facility trips, etc., is pretty well known by the transit providers, including the system there in Troy. So the accessibility shortcomings of their customers that are trying to get from their place of residence to being able to board the bus are pretty well known at that point. And the pedestrian facilities to get people from their door to boarding the bus are often the weakest link in the chain of their total trips on those days. Kathy mentioned that our sort of model that we've developed that we're learning about here was done in Troy, Alabama. So the question is, why Troy? Well, Troy has a long history of dedication to transit. It's a city of about 20,000 people and has a pretty robust transit system for a city of its size. And again, the accessibility shortcomings in their area, which exist in any of these communities really, were well known. And then strong community leadership, everything from the director of the transit system to sort of pedestrian facility advocates in the communities, right on up through their city council and their mayor are all strong community leaders who are interested in improving their transportation system. And the step-up model that we're learning about here should be able to work, we hope, in any community, but we were particularly focused in these communities that may not have had their fair share of infrastructure development over the years. And a matter of fact, in a lot of these communities, and this is not unique to Troy, but really anywhere you look, particularly communities that are anchored by public housing authority properties, their pedestrian infrastructure has not been updated for the most part in decades. So the improvement needs were pretty easy to identify, and Troy was a great partner in developing this model that we hope other communities can use. So in terms of what has come out of this effort that we've been talking about so far, what are the products? There are several that Kathy mentioned earlier in terms of the engagement guide, which is a template for how communities can do their outreach and identify their facility improvement needs. She also mentioned a walk-around guide, which essentially is something that can be taken with folks as they walk around their communities and marked up in terms of noting the condition of the infrastructure at their intersections, along their roadways, at pedestrian crossings, etc. So after the walk-around, a walk-around report is produced. And that walk-around report, here's a sample of a page from it, but really the walk-around report documents the where, the when, the who, the how that this effort was done, and provides some sort of purpose and background statements for the walk-around, as well as observations from the walk-around itself, where the pedestrian infrastructure facilities could be improved to complete gaps in the system, to take care of segments that have not been touched in a while, to bring ADA compliant upgrades. There's still a lot of locations where that hasn't happened yet. So what we're looking at here on the right side of this slide is an example of one page from a report that's several pages long, looking at a particular location in that community that was walked and documented as part of the walk-around effort that you saw the video for a couple of minutes ago. And here it shows essentially at the top of that page the current condition, and in the bottom that graphic artwork that Kathy mentioned earlier to show here's what it could look like. In this case, it's an intersection where crosswalks could be installed and associated signage, as well as adding a sidewalk on the other side of the street here at this particular location. And obviously everything should be ADA compliant when that happens. So these reports and products that Kathy mentioned some of, and I've just added a couple to the list, will soon be available for other communities to use as a model on the ATAP website. The goal is to have that before the winter holiday period available for others to use to access this community engagement guide, the walk-around guide itself, as well as these reports that have come out of the 2 communities within Troy, Alabama that we've worked in, so that other communities that would like to do this sort of street-beating level of community engagement right on through planning and ultimately design and then construction of the facility improvements will have model documents to look at, as well as several videos such as the one that Kathy showed earlier that I see the link was dropped in the chat box for. So all of that information will be available soon on the Alabama ATAP Center website. So as we said, the walk-around report documents that walk-around effort, the purpose, the background, and observations from the walk-around itself, and then includes kind of as appendices these recommendations reports. So it really takes a team of committed folks, in the case of what we've done with Troy, between the nonprofit and the ATAP Center, to have the community engagement and the communications and the art tools, as well as the engineering side of the house, to really come up with essentially a plan for how the pedestrian infrastructure could be improved in these communities. So that about wraps up the presentation that we've had at this point. So I guess, Jamie, we'll turn it back to you in terms of how you would like to manage questions.
Perfect. Thank you so much. So again, I'll remind everyone that we have the chat pod on the left-hand side. There are a few questions over there already that we will ask our speakers, but if anyone has any others, please feel free to drop those in there. Before we get to those, we do have a few poll questions for our audience. The first one is a true or false question. The STEP-UC model is a standardized process for engaging the community using a walk-around guide for communities to assess walkability, true or false. Our next question is example pedestrian facility improvements that lead to safer walking environments include crosswalks, pedestrian crossing signs, curb ramps, sidewalks, all of the above or none of the above. And then again, we have our challenge question for all of you. From this section of the webinar, what is one action item you'd consider implementing in your jurisdiction? Please jot it down at your desk, and then if you're willing to share it, we'd love to see it over in the poll question. So we'll give everyone just a few minutes to go ahead and fill those out. In the meantime, Kathy, I'm going to ask you our first question while they're all busy filling out those questions. The first one is, I might have missed this, but it seems like you're conducting walking audits for communities. Is this a free service?
Not only is it a free service, but normally the nonprofit offers up to 20% match for any kind of project we may be working on.
The next question that we have for one of you is, some of the increase in pedestrian fatalities seems to be due to increased prevalence of large SUVs and trucks on the road, more likely to cause death in a pedestrian crash. Is there a countermeasure that can address this? Roderick, do you have any thoughts on countermeasures that might address the large SUVs?
In terms of, what we know is going on with pedestrian fatalities over this last decade, we have seen the vehicle fleet move to more pickup trucks and more SUVs, more taller vehicles, heavier weight vehicles that are impacting pedestrians in more severe ways than, say, just passenger cars tend to do. So there are folks that have studied this a lot more deeply than I have, but that's what I have gathered. In terms of countermeasures, I don't have a silver bullet suggestion. Maybe somebody else does. As our vehicle fleet is growing taller and larger, the impact forces, of course, are more severe on pedestrians when struck. So I suppose for countermeasures, what we've got to do is look at ways that we can kind of like Dick Albin's theme earlier in terms of reducing the risk that the crashes will occur, and then if they do, making them less severe. So that means making pedestrians more visible, giving them better facilities, such as what's in FHWA's STEP toolbox, many countermeasures there, and then reducing vehicle speeds. So if a pedestrian is struck, obviously the lower the speed, the less severe the impact we would expect there to be.
Perfect. Thank you very much. The last one is more of a comment, I guess, than a question. And one of our audience members felt that the NHTSA crash tests do not adequately address pedestrian safety and that the European Union system is far ahead on that. At this point in time, I have gone ahead and ended the 3 polls and broadcast the results. Rod or Kathy, can one of you go ahead and address those and let the audience know if they got the answers right?
I guess I'll jump in here, and when 100% of people feel a particular way on something, we sure hope everybody is right. So in terms of the model that we've learned about here over the last 20 minutes or so, being a process that folks can use to engage their communities and assess maybe not just walkability, but the condition of their pedestrian infrastructure, I like true as an answer there. And then on that next item, in terms of example facility improvements, I'll go with all of the above as well. And there are many other possibilities even beyond what fits in a compact multiple choice question. That's, again, another opportunity to refer to the Federal Highway Administration's STEP, or Safe Transportation for Every Pedestrian, initiative that they've had going on under the Everyday Counts program for about 3 or 4 years now. There are many other countermeasures that they also mentioned in there as well.
And one last question. I believe that you mentioned this already, but there's another question in the challenges about this. The walk-around piece and the copy of your checklist, is that available already on your website? Is that something that people can get a copy of?
We plan to place all of that on the Alabama LTAP Center or the ATAP website, and it's just not, it's under construction, I guess we'll say, but the goal is within the next couple of weeks or so to have all of that out there.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And another question came in about these slides and the previous webinars be available afterwards. They will. They're all available right now on the ruralsafetycenter.org website in our archive training page, other than this one that's currently being recorded. This one and the PowerPoint slides will be available within the next couple days. And then once Rod has his website ready as well, we can also link to that as well. At this point, I am going to turn us back over to our presentation. So thank you, Kathy and Rod, for talking about this step up process. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Duncan so he can talk a little bit about South Carolina's Rural Roads program. So Duncan?
Good afternoon, everyone. I think a lot of the stuff that I'm going to talk about, Dick already hit, but this is going to kind of focus in on kind of how we've taken a lot of the things we learned from him through the years and made something out of it. So just a few facts to get things started. Some fun and not so fun facts. We've the 11th smallest state, 24th most populous, with 2/3 of the state is forested, and we have the 4th largest state-maintained roadway system. And the not so fun fact is our roads are the deadliest in the nation. We have the not so distinct honor of being #1 in fatality rate, with a long way to go between us and getting down to the national average. So we look at typically a little over 1,000 fatalities a year. So we've got to get rid of 350 in order to even, get down to the national rate. So we got a lot up against us. Oh, sorry. I just realized I was using my wrong screen. I apologize to everyone for that. So here's where I was. All right. So when we looked at this, we've got a whole lot going on in South Carolina. We're trying to figure out what we need to do to move the needle, and our rural rates are high. Obviously, number 11 in the nation, 9% above the average rate, and then fatality rate involving trees is, that's #1 for us. So what we learned as we were digging through the data is that 56% of our fatalities were occurring on our rural roads. And in the 5 years that we looked at, the 5-year snapshot, we had almost 7,000 fatal and serious injury crashes. And so one of the things is, our rural roads are secondary, or not just the secondaries, but for South Carolina, that's our interstate routes and our primaries and major routes as well. Although we do have an interstate program, we didn't have something in place to work through these other rural locations. So as I said, most of them are rural major routes. 563 interstate routes, 2,000 plus U.S. routes and SC routes, and then 72 miles of secondary with 5,000 total. And so what we're trying to do is, all right, how do we capture this? How do we go after such a big problem in such a big area? And what we decided to do was just to kind of keep digging down the data. And as we moved through, we found that, you know, here was this 46% was a big chunk of where these roads were, and it was only where the injuries were, but it was only a small number of the mileage, or a smaller number. So we started in on that, and then as we continued down that path, we were able to dig. We were able to get it down to, you know, 68% of the volume was on 17% of the roads. And that's where we were having the most fatal and serious injury crashes. And so to kind of try to understand a little bit more about the issue we had, roadway departure was the #1 cause, and then, you know, again, as part of that, you know, we had the fixed objects, with trees being a primary cause for us to deal with. So again, based on the data set we had 47% were departing from road, 34 striking a fixed object, and 46% at night. So with a problem this big, what do you do? So back to the same pie chart I showed you a second ago, we start working through how do we get this down to something manageable? And so we looked and we realized as we dug in that nearly 30% of the fatal and serious injury crashes were happening on just 5% of the roads. So now we've got it down to something that we can do something with. And that's making a big dent. You know, 30% of all these crashes on just 5% of the roads, that's how you really stretch your dollar. And then speaking of dollars, that gets us to, you know, our next point is how do we fund it? One of the other problems that we've dealt with in South Carolina is that not only are we the 4th largest system, but at the time of this, when we were coming up with this program back in 2015, 2016, we had one of the lowest gas taxes in the nation. No one had, we hadn't had a gas tax increase since 1984. And so we went to the legislature and we begged with them and we showed them, you know, all this same information that, you know, we're showing you guys today. And we explained to them, you know, we needed more money. And our Secretary of Transportation, she did a wonderful job of going to them and, you know, breaking it down and saying, you know, if you give us this many more pennies on the gallon, then I can do this much. And if you give us this much more, then, you know, and so on and so forth. And she was able to be successful at getting us a good raise in money. But one of the things that had happened was our system had just been depleted for so long. So we had all this deferred maintenance. You know, we've had these older roads that hadn't been resurfaced in years, and they just kept getting pushed down. So, you know, that's kind of what we deduced led us to the situation where we were in, and now we're trying to dig ourselves back out of it. And again, you know, I mentioned this before, just kind of repeating some of this data as we go through. This is some of the same information that we presented to our legislative partners in trying to get them to support us and get us where we needed to be funding-wise. And you know, again, the 30% on 5% is just, that makes it real easy for them to understand. And so that led us to our funding, and we got the money we needed. We got a 10-year program with $50 million a year, and that started then. In 2017, we had an engineering directive written by our upper management, and we were able to use that. And this directive, I'll post a link to our website, and I'll talk about that at the end. But this is the criteria for how we selected the routes and how we narrowed it down to the ones we were going to use in this project. So we've got our money, we've got our roads, and now we've got to try to figure out, you know, all right, what are we going to do? So we wanted to go with obviously with a systemic engineering solution, and what we did was the first step, we kind of call it like a two-tier approach, where step one is to try to keep people in the road. We've got rumble strips, wider and brighter pavement markings, guardrail, and high reflective signs and panels. And then the next thing is, okay, once they leave the road, what are we going to do? And that's where we got the wider shoulders. We paved 4 foot of shoulders and beveled in pipes, clear zone, and relocated ditches. So now we've got the ideas of, all right, these are the countermeasures, this is what we're going to do. Now how do we start doing it? Well, we divided that list of nearly 2,000 miles, and we put it into 3 buckets. Bucket 1 is what was projects that we looked at that we determined we could handle in-house with strip maps. And bucket 2 was projects that we were going to use our consultant partners for, because they would be projects that are a little more complex in nature. And then bucket 3 were some that we needed to get some more information on. So we got our survey data in, and we use that to help us pick what type of projects were going where. We started out 2018, we had 80 miles gone to consultants. Then we turned around the next year and got another 100 miles to the consultants. And you know, the big things we were doing on a lot of these is just, you know, trying to decide how to treat the roadside hazards. You know, as Dick mentioned earlier in his, you know, do you protect it? Do you, you know, shield it, fill the wetlands? You know, so those were a lot of the hard decisions, and that was the ones that we got our consultant partners in on. And then, you know, we had a very robust public involvement process. It's been kind of a double-edged sword for us. The public involvement process has it. There's been situations where we've not been allowed to do as much as we would like to do because of the public outcry, but then again, we've had other places where they've helped us and supported us. As some of you may face in your own state, in South Carolina, folks really love their trees. They have an affinity for trees here, and trees are one of our #1 problems with roadway departure crashes. So yeah, we're at a little tough stalemate there, but we're still focusing on some of the other countermeasures that help us get through the same results. One of the other things that's beneficial with this program to help us get the most out of our dollars is we look for partnering opportunities within the agency. You know, the Rural Road Safety Program is housed in the Traffic Safety Office, and then we have other arenas that we've got our Director of Maintenance Office. They have their funding sources, and then we have our actual you know, our regional production groups and the projects that they do, the widenings and things like that. So what we try to do is if we identified a location where someone was already in the process of developing a project, we would either, one, pull theirs into ours and we would handle the project, or we would infuse funds into their projects to get our countermeasures added to it, as far as the wider paved shoulders and the centerline, edgeline rumble strips and signing and pavement markings. So that was something that was definitely beneficial. Through some of our early accomplishments, you know, we were able to, you know, use that, put on our maintenance hats and kind of, you know, give a little bit of flexibility and kind of balance between the adverse impacts and the available funds. And, you know, we had some projects that were in historically sensitive areas, and you know, they definitely wanted their trees there, so we had to take a step back on some of those, but, you know, it was helpful, and we still got a good project at the end of the day. So some other partnering that we've done with our maintenance office, our director of maintenance office, was we have 7 districts in engineering districts in South Carolina, and we give each one of those districts $500,000 a year that they can use to go in with their tree clearing on-call contractors and go ahead and clear some of the trees from routes that were identified as part of this program. And that's been a huge help, because that all gets done before the public involvement process, and it just goes on during routine maintenance, and, you know, we don't get the whole outcry of please don't cut the trees down, you know, and we're able to get in and out a lot quicker after that. So this guess that picture didn't show up. Well, here's an after of this was one of our projects. Here's another location. This is before what it looked like, and here's what we had afterwards. This is, you know, this is our crews coming in and how we're extending that paved shoulder. I'm sorry, folks, some of these slides are not, but here's an important one. Here's where we are today with the program. So this would be one good takeaway for everyone. So far, we've addressed 703 miles. That's close to 200 where we've done the full scope of the project. You know, we've got another 190 that's under construction right now, 300 of partial scope, and then 100 in design, and we've got some that aren't started. And then we've also got some various things like that partial scope. What we're talking about there is we've got some that have been resurfaced, but they haven't had the tree clearing done, or vice versa. And this is our website. As I mentioned, I'm going to drop that over here in the chat pod for you guys. And just to explain how to get to it, if you came from scdot.org, you would look in the public involvement and then project viewer, and then rural road safety projects. And then you have to click the link down at the bottom left after you're in that map, and that gets you to our program. And there's the tabs across the top that show all the different things. Here's an example of the types of improvements. You know, you can see what the stripes look like, the difference in the day and the night, and then some before and afters of some locations, and then our progress, and then how you want, if anyone wants to reach out to us, you can send us your comments and stuff there. We'll reach back to you. And that's all I have, so hopefully I stayed within my time.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Duncan. We do have a few questions that came in already for Duncan. If you have any additional ones, please go ahead and put those over in the left-hand side in the chat pod. And in the meantime, we are going to move over to poll questions for you all. The first one is, which of the following was not one of the steps used by South Carolina DOT in implementing their Rural Roads program? Analyze data to identify high-priority rural roads, identify available funding sources, create a local road safety plan, determine systemic engineering solutions, prioritize projects into 3 buckets, identify partnering opportunities, or implement improvements. So again, which one of those was not a part of their program? And then our next question is, what were some of South Carolina DOT's systemic engineering solutions for keeping vehicles on the road and giving an opportunity to get back on the road? Please list any of those in the open-ended question. And lastly, again, we have that challenge question for you all. From this section of the webinar, what's one action item you might consider implementing in your own jurisdiction? Please jot it down at your desk, and then if you'd like to share it in the poll pod, we'd love to see it. So Duncan, we have a question that came in for you. They were curious as to why you have guardrail under keeping vehicles on the road. It says, unlike signs or pavement markings that provide drivers with positive information to stay on the road, I see guardrail as a last resort for people who run off the road.
Where is that question written? I want to read that.
Absolutely. Over in the presenter notes on the left-hand side, or sorry, on your right-hand side, you can see it.
Okay.
Did you find it?
Yes, ma'am, I found it.
Okay.
I'm just trying to make sure I understand the wording on that question. Yeah, I guess you can, I mean, if you want to, I mean, it could go in really either. That's once they leave the travel lane. So, I mean, you could put it in the other. We just, I guess as we were thinking about this, we just considered that as keeping them in the roadway, maybe not so much in the lane. So, if you wanted to move that to a different line, you can. But it's still trying to reduce the severity of the crash.
Another question for you and maybe also for Dick is, are there additional concerns with mailbox posts? Are there breakaway standards, or are they needing mitigation? It says maintenance review of roadway and deals with these individually with the owners, but there are liabilities if they're within the state right of way, and if they're struck like a tree.
I'll
so I
try
guess
that one
is
out.
there the same type of, are there the same type of concerns with mailboxes in state right of way as, you know, if you were to strike a mailbox, as there would be as if you were to strike a tree?
Absolutely. Mailboxes can be pose a significant risk, mainly because the mailbox themselves, whether it be a multiple mailbox, you know, they're on a 2x6 or on a single post, a single mailbox on a post, those are right at windshield height. So when a vehicle hits it, there's a tendency for it to want to come in the vehicle. There have been mailboxes that have been designed to be crash-worthy and tested to be crash-worthy. In the roadside design guide, there's a whole, there's an appendix and a chapter on mailboxes in the AASHTO roadside design guide. And in current language, the MASH testing, all of you that are familiar with crash testing and whatnot, MASH is the new standard for crash testing. Most of the testing that's been done on mailboxes has been done by the Texas DOT, Texas Transportation Institute, and they've tested quite a few mailboxes at this point.
Thank you, Dick. Another question for all of our speakers, whoever would like to address this, is that reducing speeds to tolerable levels is the vital element for survivability. Can any of our speakers talk about treatments to reduce speeds following the safe system principles?
Hearing silence, I'll just chime in.
Perfect.
This is Dick again. From a rural roadway departure standpoint, I'm not aware of many effective treatments to reduce speeds. When you get into a more urbanized area, things like roundabouts and things like that might be effective at reducing speeds of vehicles going through. But I guess I'm also interested in hearing if there's anything that's been done in a rural environment to reduce speeds.
And Kathy and Rod, did you guys come across any countermeasures that you put in during your after your walkability assessments that may also help with the speed part of separating road users from the speeds of vehicles?
Well, with the pedestrian facilities improvements that we were looking at, they have not actually been implemented as yet, at least in Troy and another community we worked in that they were before that. But much of those improvements to pedestrian facilities don't really directly have an impact on vehicle speeds, other than a couple of locations where we recommended a speed table, which would serve as a raised crosswalk, which is a pedestrian safety countermeasure under the STEP initiative, but it also comes from the traffic calming side of the house. So that would be one where we could reduce speeds of vehicles so that if pedestrians were struck, it would be less severe. But most of the pedestrian infrastructure needs that we saw were really part of the pedestrian infrastructure itself and not the roadway per se.
Perfect, thank you. And then also, the last webinar that we did in this series was on safe speeds, so there were quite a few different countermeasures that were on there. And again, you can find the archive for that on the ruralsafetycenter.org website under our archive training file. And if you cannot find that, please feel free to reach out to me directly at info@ruralsafetycenter.org, and I can get you a link to that. Duncan, if you wouldn't mind, I have ended the polls and broadcast the results. If you could quickly just go through those two polls and let everyone know the right answer, we'll go ahead and get the webinar wrapped up.
All right, so which of the following was not one of the steps used by SCDOT in implementing their rural road program? The correct answer, which is what was not used, was a creating a local road safety plan. Wow, did people all change their answers once I said that? That's pretty interesting. Didn't realize you could do that. The next question was, what were some of SCDOT's systemic engineering solutions for keeping vehicles on the road and giving them an opportunity to get back on the road? Safety edge, rumble strips, wider shoulders, rumble strips, wider shoulders. Somebody got very detailed. Got a couple of really good ones. We don't like to call it tree clearance, though. We like to call it clear zone improvements. That's a little easier for some people to swallow. So, yep, all good answers there.
Perfect, thank you. I'm going to move us back over to our webinar and close it out. I did just put the link for the archived trainings into the chat pod for anyone who is looking for those. So as we mentioned in today's webinar, we had 6 learning outcomes, 2 of which focused on reducing roadway departures, 2 that focused on the step up model, and 2 that focused on South Carolina DOT's Rural Road Safety Program. We do have 2 slides here of all of different resources. Again, you can download this PowerPoint or a PDF of the PowerPoint from the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. It will also be available with the archived version of this webinar. Additionally, there were several different videos that were shown to you today, so the links for all of those are also available. And we do have some upcoming webinars and announcements for you. The 2022 Road to Zero Community Traffic Safety Grants are now open. You can find that on the Road to Zero website. We do have a link to that on the Rural Safety Center's banner on our homepage, so you can feel free to take a look at that. There are also several upcoming webinars in December to make you aware of. Tomorrow, actually, December 1st, FHWA's Office of Safety will be doing a webinar on their local and rural road technical assistance program from 1 to 2:30. On December 9th, we will be doing our part 6 of this webinar series on post-crash care. Forward and Dick's group will be having a webinar on December 14th from 1 to 3, talking about the systemic approach to safety and highlighting information from their 5 peer exchanges that they had. And then there will be a webinar on improving the road safety workforce, which will talk about the Rural Safety Center's Road Safety Champion program on December 15th. You can find more information about all of these webinars and where to register on our website as well. And one more time, I do just want to thank all 4 of our speakers, Dick, Rod, Kathy, and Duncan, so much for their information today and sharing their experience and expertise on safe roads with us. You can find their email addresses on the screen right now in case you have any additional questions that you'd like to follow up with them afterwards. So thank you again, and everybody have a great afternoon.